I recently had to experience something that no parent should ever endure, watching a crooked judge try to crush my innocent black son right in front of my eyes. One minute, Marcus was heading to the gym to meet a friend. The next, he was thrown in cuffs, accused of assaulting a white girl he'd never even met. They dragged him into court without a lawyer. The judge, Vernon Grissom, leaned in real close and told my boy that if he didn't plead guilty, the jury would see exactly what they want to see, meaning Marcus's skin color. When I burst through those courtroom doors, they treated me like a nobody. Like my voice, my rights, my son's life didn't matter. But what that filthy judge didn't know was this. He wasn't railroading just any father. He was railroading a sitting United States Supreme Court justice. And I wasn't about to let him destroy my son without tearing down every rotten brick of his empire. What happened next would make Grissom wish he'd never heard our name. But let's start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where in the world you're listening from today. I was halfway through my turkey sandwich when my phone buzzed against the conference table. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail during lunch with my clerks, but something, call it paternal instinct, made me glance at the screen. Unknown number, local area code. "Excuse me?" I said, standing up. My clerks nodded, used to the interruptions that came with my position on the Supreme Court. I stepped into my private chambers and answered. "Justice Williams speaking." "Sir, this is Officer Daniels from the Millfield Police Department." The voice was clipped, professional. "I'm calling about your son, Marcus." My hand tightened around the phone. "What about my son?" "He's been arrested, sir, assault charges." The sandwich I'd just eaten turned to concrete in my stomach. Assault? There must be some mistake. "No mistake, sir. He's being processed now and will appear before Judge Grissom within the hour for arraignment." Judge Grissom? The name sent a chill through me. Even in my position, I'd heard whispers about Vernon Grissom's courtroom, a place where justice went to die, especially for young black men. "What exactly is he accused of?" I demanded. "Assaulting a young woman, sir, a Miss Claire Whitley." The name meant nothing to me. "Who?" "Marcus doesn't know any Claire Whitley." "That's not what the witness statements say, sir. I suggest you get down to the courthouse if you want to be present for the arraignment." The call ended. I stood frozen, my judicial composure shattered. Marcus, my quiet, studious son who'd just graduated high school with honors, arrested for assault? Against a white girl he didn't know? The absurdity of it collided with the terror of knowing how quickly the system could swallow a young black man whole. I burst back into the conference room. "Emergency, family matter, I need to go." My senior clerk, Janet, stood immediately. "Of course, Justice Williams, do you need anything?" "Reschedule everything, I don't know when I'll be back." I was already grabbing my coat, leaving my half-eaten lunch forgotten. The drive to Millfield, my hometown where Marcus still lived with my sister while I worked in D.C., was a blur of highway and panic. I tried calling Marcus's phone repeatedly, straight to voicemail. My sister wasn't answering either. My mind raced through the morning's timeline. Marcus had texted me at 7:30 a.m. saying he was heading to the gym, then meeting his friend Dion to work on college applications. Nothing unusual, nothing that put him anywhere near trouble or near any girl named Claire Whitley. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to think like a justice and not a terrified father. Evidence, timeline, witnesses. But every logical thought dissolved into the image of my son, my only child, alone and afraid in a system I knew could crush him in an instant. The small-town courthouse came into view as I turned onto Main Street. My hands were shaking as I parked haphazardly in the first spot I found. The familiar weight of my credentials felt strange in my pocket. Here I wasn't Justice Williams of the Supreme Court. I was just Marcus's father racing against time. I took the courthouse steps 2 at a time, my heart hammering against my ribs. The building was old, with that particular smell of dust and desperation that permeates small-town justice. I knew the layout from my early days as a lawyer. Arraignments would be in courtroom B. As I rounded the corner, I saw through the window in the courtroom door. There he was, Marcus, my son, slumped in a chair at the defendant's table. Even from here, I could see the fear in his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward. No lawyer beside him. just two uniformed officers standing uncomfortably close. And there, elevated on the bench, sat Judge Vernon Grissom. Even from behind the door, I could read his body language. The forward lean, the pointing finger, the smug certainty of a man who'd already decided guilt before hearing evidence. I pressed closer to the door, straining to hear. "Look, son," Grissom was saying, his voice carrying that false concern that made my skin crawl. "The evidence is pretty clear. Miss Whitley's testimony, the witness statements, fighting this will only make things worse for you. A guilty plea today means we can wrap this up quickly. 6 months, maybe less with good behavior." Marcus's voice was so small I barely recognized it. "But sir, I didn't do anything. I've never even met her." Grissom's laugh was short and cold. "That's not what she says, and between a college-bound white girl and, well," he gestured vaguely at my son, "let's just say juries in this county have certain tendencies." My blood turned to ice, then fire. This wasn't justice, this was a railroad job, and my son was tied to the tracks. I shoved the door open, the bang of it hitting the wall, silencing the room. Every head turned. Marcus's eyes widened, relief and fear battling across his bruised face. Bruised? When had that happened? "Dad." The word came out half-sob. I strode forward, every inch the Supreme Court justice, even in my rumpled shirt and without my robes. "This proceeding stops right now." Judge Grissom's eyes narrowed as he recognized me. For a fraction of a second, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Then his expression hardened into something ugly and determined. "Justice Williams," he said, my title sounding like an insult in his mouth. "This is my courtroom, and we're in the middle of an arraignment." "You're in the middle of coercing a plea from an unrepresented minor," I shot back, reaching Marcus and placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Our eyes locked across the courtroom, mine burning with the fury of a father, his calculating the danger I represented to whatever scheme he was running. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just about Marcus. Something much darker was happening in Judge Grissom's courtroom, and I was going to tear it all down even if it cost me everything. I stepped forward, my legal training taking over where parental panic threatened to consume me. "My son is entitled to legal counsel before any plea discussions. This proceeding is irregular and potentially unconstitutional." The courtroom fell into a hush. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. The bailiffs, the clerk furiously scribbling notes, and most importantly, Marcus, whose breathing had become slightly less panicked with me standing beside him. Judge Grissom leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel lightly against the bench. Not banging it, just tapping, like a man idly playing with a toy. The casual arrogance of the gesture made my jaw clench. "Justice Williams," he drawled, stretching out my title like taffy. "While your credentials are impressive, you seem to have forgotten where you are. This is my courtroom." He smiled then, a cold curling of lips that never reached his eyes. "And in my courtroom, I determine procedure." "The law determines procedure," I countered, placing my hand protectively on Marcus's shoulder. I could feel him trembling. "And the law is clear about—" "Bailiffs!" Grissom cut me off, his voice suddenly sharp as a blade. "Remove Mr. Williams from my courtroom. He is disrupting these proceedings." 2 deputies moved toward me immediately. I stood my ground, incredulous. "This is outrageous. I'm his father. I have every right to—" Strong hands gripped my arms. I'm not a small man, but these deputies were built like linebackers, and their grip was iron. "Dad!" Marcus's voice cracked with panic. "It's okay, Marcus. Don't say anything. Don't sign anything," I called out as they began pulling me toward the door. I struggled against their hold, dignity forgotten in the face of my son's terror. "I'll get you out, I promise." As they dragged me backward, I caught Grissom's expression. It wasn't anger I saw there, or even the indignation of a judge whose authority had been challenged. It was satisfaction, a cold, cruel pleasure that sent ice through my veins. This wasn't just happening. He was making it happen, and enjoying every second. The courtroom door slammed behind us, cutting off my view of Marcus. The deputies marched me down the hallway, their grip never loosening. "You're making a serious mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the fury and fear coursing through me. "Just doing our job, sir," the older deputy replied, not unkindly. "Judge's orders." They released me at the courthouse steps, standing guard to ensure I didn't try to re-enter. I straightened my jacket, my mind racing. This wasn't mere incompetence or small-town justice being sloppy. The look in Grissom's eyes had made that crystal clear. This was deliberate, calculated. But why Marcus? Why my son? I paced the courthouse steps, trying to formulate a plan. I could call colleagues, pull strings, have the case transferred. But that would take time. Time Marcus didn't have if Grissom was pressuring him into a plea right now. The courthouse door opened and a thin woman in her 50s emerged, clutching a manila folder. The court clerk. She glanced around nervously before approaching me. "Mr. Williams, these are the bail terms for Marcus Williams." She handed me the folder with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then hurried back inside before I could question her. I flipped open the folder and my breath caught. The bail amount made my eyes widen. $500,000. For a first-time alleged assault with no prior record. It was absurd, punitive, designed specifically to keep Marcus locked up. My mind raced through the implications. I could pay it, of course, I had the resources. But to post bail of that magnitude would require paperwork, records. My true identity would be impossible to conceal. And something told me that exposing myself as a Supreme Court justice would only escalate whatever game Grissom was playing. The courthouse doors opened again. This time Marcus emerged, flanked by the same two deputies. His hands were cuffed in front of him, his head bowed. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that broke my heart. "Dad," he called out, his voice cracking. I moved toward him instinctively, but one of the deputies stepped between us. "Sorry, sir. He's being transferred to county jail." "Can I at least speak to my son?" I demanded. The deputy hesitated, then gave a small nod. "1 minute." I stepped close to Marcus, placing my hands on his shoulders. Up close, I could see the bruise forming on his cheekbone, the split in his lip. Someone had hurt him. The rage that surged through me was almost blinding. "Listen to me," I said urgently, keeping my voice low. "Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything. I'm going to get you out of this." "Dad, I didn't do it," he whispered, eyes swimming with tears. "I swear, I never even met that girl." "I know, son. I believe you." I squeezed his shoulders. "Trust me. I won't let you stay in there long." "Time's up," the deputy said, firmly but not unkindly. They led Marcus toward the waiting transport van, his shoulders hunched, looking suddenly so young and vulnerable that it physically hurt to watch. As they loaded him inside, the reality of the situation hit me with crushing force. My son, my only child, was being sent to county jail for a crime he didn't commit, by a judge who seemed to have orchestrated the whole thing. Marcus's life now hung on a razor's edge, and I was the only one who could save him. I spent the next 6 hours making calls from my car, burning through favors I'd saved for decades. Every legal channel I tried slammed shut in my face. Something wasn't right. The system I'd dedicated my life to was suddenly as impenetrable as a fortress wall. "I'm sorry, Justice Williams," my longtime colleague at the state attorney's office whispered over the phone. "There's been some kind of flag placed on this case. Nobody's willing to touch it." "What kind of flag?" I demanded, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. "I don't know, but it came from high up, very high up." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, that cold feeling spreading through my chest again. Who had the power to lock down a simple assault case this thoroughly? And why target my son? I tried 3 different bail bondsmen. Each one took my information, then called back with regret in their voices. "Sorry, sir, we can't help with this particular case." No explanations, just polite refusals. By sunset, I'd exhausted every legal avenue I could think of. The only option left was to go directly to the county jail and see my son. At least I could make sure he was all right, remind him he wasn't alone. The county detention center loomed against the darkening sky, a sprawling concrete complex surrounded by razor wire. I parked and walked toward the entrance, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I'd visited prisons before as part of my work, but never like this. Never with my heart in my throat and my son on the other side. The intake officer barely glanced at my ID. Visiting hours end at 8. You've got 45 minutes. I sat in the waiting area, surrounded by weary-looking women and children. A young mother across from me bounced a fussy baby on her knee while explaining to her toddler why Daddy couldn't come home tonight. The raw humanity of the place pressed in on me from all sides. 2 guards walked past, coffee cups in hand, laughing about something. I wouldn't have paid attention except for one phrase that cut through their conversation. That new kid they brought in today. I tensed, straining to hear without being obvious. Yeah, judge's special request, the taller one snickered. Straight to D block. With Ricks? The second guard whistled low. Damn, kid must have pissed someone off real good. Rich college boy like that? Ricks is gonna eat him alive. They moved past, still chuckling, unaware of the ice that had just crystallized in my veins. D block. Darnell Ricks. Even I knew that name. He'd been in the papers last year after orchestrating a brutal prison assault that left another inmate paralyzed. And they'd put my son, my 18-year-old son, in with him. Deliberately, I nearly stood up ready to demand answers, to pull rank, to do whatever it took. But the rational part of my brain held me back. If I revealed who I was, I'd only make things worse. Whatever game Grissom was playing, exposing myself would only give him more ammunition. Williams, the officer called. Your visitor is ready. They led me to a long room divided by a thick glass partition with phones on either side. I took a seat at Station 7 and waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. When Marcus appeared on the other side, it took everything I had not to react. His left eye was swollen nearly shut. His lip, already split from earlier, was now grotesquely puffed up. He moved gingerly, like someone nursing broken ribs. He picked up the phone with shaking hands. Dad, he said, his voice thin and cracked. Marcus. I pressed my palm against the glass. What happened? Welcome party. He tried to smile, but it turned into a wince. They put me in with some guys who... they don't like new people. I knew he was downplaying it. I could see the terror behind his eyes, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. Listen to me, I said, keeping my voice steady with effort. I'm working on getting you out. Today was just a setback. They're saying I could be here for months before trial. His voice broke. Dad, I can't. I don't think I can. You won't be. I promise you that. I leaned closer to the glass. Marcus, look at me. Have I ever broken a promise to you? He shook his head slightly. I need you to be strong for a little longer. Can you do that? I'll try. His eyes darted behind him again. There's this guy, Ricks. Everyone's scared of him. He said he's going to... Visiting time's over, a guard announced, tapping Marcus on the shoulder. No, wait, I protested, but Marcus was already being led away. He looked back once, his face a mask of barely contained panic, before disappearing through the security door. I sat there, the dead phone still clutched in my hand, a rage unlike anything I'd ever known building inside me. This wasn't justice. This was cruelty, deliberately orchestrated by a man who wore the same robes I did. As I walked back to my car, I made a decision. I'd spent my life playing by the rules, believing in the system. But the system had been corrupted, turned against my son. So be it. If Grissom wanted to play dirty, he'd learn that a father protecting his child was capable of things that a Supreme Court justice would never consider. I'll find another way, I whispered into the night air. I swear it. I drove home in a fog of rage and fear, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The house felt empty, haunted by Marcus's absence. His basketball shoes by the door, his jacket thrown over the back of a chair, the half-finished physics homework on the kitchen table. Every reminder was a knife twist. I went straight to my study and pulled out my phone. I needed help, the kind that wouldn't ask questions about why a Supreme Court justice was operating incognito in a small-town criminal case. My usual contacts were out of the question. Too official. Too visible. I scrolled through my contacts, desperate for someone who might understand the gravity of what was happening without requiring explanations I couldn't give. Then I saw it. Lorraine King. Lorraine and I had crossed paths years ago when I was still a public defender. She was already a legend then, a fierce defense attorney who'd taken down 3 corrupt judges and a district attorney in her 30-year career. She'd retired about 5 years back, but rumors said she still consulted on cases involving judicial misconduct. My finger hovered over her name. Calling her meant dragging someone else into this nightmare. It meant admitting I couldn't protect my own son alone. But Marcus's battered face flashed in my mind. His terror. The way he'd looked back at me as they led him away. I made the call. "This is Lorraine," came a gravelly voice after 3 rings. "Lorraine, it's..." I caught myself before using my real name. "It's Williams. We worked together on the Henton case back in 2008. A long pause. "Williams," she repeated, and I could hear the skepticism. "Been a long time. You've come up in the world since then." My heart stuttered. She knew who I was. "I need your help," I said quietly. "It's my son." Another pause. "Mabel's Diner. Highway 16 just outside town. 1 hour." The line went dead. Mabel's Diner was a fading relic of the 1950s, its neon sign flickering weakly against the darkening sky. I parked at the far end of the lot and waited, watching each car that pulled in. At exactly 8:30, a weathered Volvo station wagon rolled into the space beside mine. Lorraine King stepped out, her silver hair cropped close to her scalp, thick glasses perched on her nose. She wore a simple brown cardigan and carried a worn leather briefcase. She slid into the booth across from me without a word, signaling to the waitress for coffee. "So," she said once the waitress had retreated, "the Honorable Justice has a problem." "My son," I said, leaning forward. "Marcus. He's been arrested on false charges." "In Vernon Grissom's court." It wasn't a question. I nodded, then told her everything. The phone call, the railroaded hearing, the impossible bail, the dangerous cell assignment. As I spoke, Lorraine's expression grew increasingly grim. "You think this is just about a corrupt judge?" she said when I finished. "It's not." The waitress returned with coffee. Lorraine waited until she was out of earshot. "Vernon Grissom doesn't just run a courtroom," she continued, her voice low. "He runs this entire county like his personal fiefdom, has for 20 years. "What do you mean? But I mean he controls who gets elected, which businesses thrive and which get code violations that shut them down, which cops get promoted and which get night shifts in the worst neighborhoods." She took a sip of her coffee. "And most importantly, he controls who goes to prison." "For bribes?" I asked. "That's just the surface. Grissom has a partnership with Meridian Corrections Corporation. They built that private prison 10 miles north of here 15 years ago. Every kid Grissom sends there is worth about $40,000 a year to the company." My stomach turned. "And Grissom gets a cut. A big one. But it's more than money." Lorraine's eyes hardened. "He likes it. The power. Watching families beg. Breaking people who stand against him." I felt cold all over. This wasn't just corruption. This was systematic evil. "How has no one stopped him?" "People have tried." Her voice dropped even lower. 3 reporters who investigated him had their careers destroyed. A state prosecutor who built a case against him died in a hunting accident. The last attorney who really pushed..." She shook her head. "His daughter got arrested on drug charges, took her own life in county lockup." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't just in danger of a false conviction, his life was at stake. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because you need to understand what you're up against." Lorraine's gaze was unflinching. "Grissom will destroy you and your son without a second thought, and he'll enjoy doing it." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it across the table. "These are cases, dozens of them. Kids like your son who went before Grissom and ended up with sentences 10 times what they should have gotten. Notes on witnesses who changed their stories overnight. Evidence that disappeared from police lockup." I stared at the folder, feeling the weight of all those ruined lives. "It's not enough for charges," Lorraine said. "I've tried, but it might help you understand his patterns, how he works." I placed my hand on the folder. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Lorraine's face was solemn. "This fight will cost you. Are you ready for that?" The image of Marcus's terrified eyes as they led him away flashed through my mind again. "I don't have a choice," I said. I spread the files across my kitchen table, each manila folder a testament to a young life derailed. Lorraine sat opposite me, her glasses pushed up on her forehead as she scrutinized a court transcript. "Look at this one," I said, sliding a file toward her. "Jamal Washington, 17, arrested for shoplifting a candy bar, somehow ended up with a 3-year sentence for aggravated retail theft. How is that even possible?" Lorraine barely glanced up. "Check the plea agreement." I flipped through the paperwork until I found it. He pled guilty to a felony? For a candy bar? "Keep reading." I scanned the document, feeling my blood pressure climb with each line. The public defender advised him to take the deal because the store owner was going to testify that Jamal had a knife. I looked up, incredulous. That's absurd. "Now check the evidence log." I did. No knife was ever found or entered into evidence. Exactly. Lorraine pushed her own file across to me. "Now look at this one. Tanya Miller, 16, arrested for fighting at school, pled guilty to assault with a deadly weapon. 5 years. What was the supposed weapon?" "A pencil." Lorraine's voice was flat with disgust, which the so-called victim admitted later was never used as a threat. But by then, Tanya was already in Meridian's juvenile facility. We worked through the night, file after file revealing the same pattern. Young defendants, mostly Black or Latino, charged with minor offenses that somehow morphed into serious felonies. Coerced plea deals, missing evidence, public defenders who seemed to work for the prosecution. "Here's another one," I said around 3 a.m., my eyes burning from fatigue. Devin Carter, 19, accused of stealing a bicycle, pled guilty to grand theft auto. "Let me guess," Lorraine said, rubbing her temples. "The bicycle magically transformed into a car in the charging documents?" Worse, there was a car stolen in the same neighborhood that night. Different description of the perpetrator entirely, but somehow Devin got charged with both crimes. "And the public defender?" I checked the signature. "Thomas Whiting." "Whiting again." Lorraine made a note. "That's the 5th case tonight with his name on it. He's clearly one of Grissom's people." I pushed back from the table, stretching my stiff muscles. The kitchen clock read 3:17 a.m. Somewhere across town, Marcus was trying to survive another night in that hellhole. "We have enough here to write an expose that would blow the lid off this whole operation," I said. "Get it to the right newspaper, maybe the Justice Department." "And then what?" Lorraine cut me off. "You think Grissom doesn't have contingency plans? The moment we go public, 2 things happen. First, your identity gets exposed, which compromises your position and any influence you might leverage. Second, Marcus becomes a target for prison justice before any help can reach him." My fists clenched involuntarily. "So we just sit here while my son—" "We move carefully," Lorraine interrupted. "We build a case so airtight that when we strike, Grissom falls immediately. No time to retaliate." I knew she was right, but every cell in my body screamed to act now. "How long will that take?" "Longer than you want. Less time than you fear." She gestured to the mountain of files. "We have enough to establish the pattern, but not enough to legally crush him. We need financial records showing the kickbacks. We need witnesses willing to testify. And meanwhile, Marcus sits in jail." "Yes." Her voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry, but rushing this could get both of you killed. Grissom has buried people before." I thought of the prosecutor who died in a hunting accident, the lawyer's daughter who supposedly took her own life in custody, the same custody where my son now sat. "I'll be careful," I promised, "but every minute feels like—" My phone rang, cutting me off. Unknown number. At 3:20 in the morning, that couldn't be good news. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" This is Officer Daniels from County. The voice was low, almost a whisper. You're listed as Marcus Johnson's emergency contact. My heart lurched. What's happened? Is he hurt? No, sir, but I thought you should know they've transferred him. Transferred where? Can't say more. Wasn't supposed to call at all. Just, if you were planning anything, you should know he's not here anymore. The line went dead. I stared at Lorraine, ice flooding my veins. They've moved him. Marcus is gone. Lorraine's face drained of color. This is bad. Grissom's accelerating his timeline. What does that mean? It means, she said grimly, that someone tipped him off. He knows we're looking into him. I thought of Marcus, alone and terrified, being transported to God knows where. The files on the table suddenly seemed inadequate against the monster we were fighting. We need to find him, I said, already reaching for my coat. Now. I grabbed my keys, already halfway to the door. I'll drive. Wait. Lorraine caught my arm. Think. If they've moved him, they'll be watching for you. I don't care. You should. Her eyes were hard, urgent. If they see you coming, they'll just move him again. Or worse. The implication hung in the air between us. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the panic clawing at my throat. Fine, I said. You drive? 20 minutes later, we pulled into the county jail parking lot. The building loomed dark and imposing against the pre-dawn sky. I was out of the car before Lorraine had fully stopped, striding toward the entrance with my heart hammering against my ribs. The night desk sergeant barely looked up when I approached. Visiting hours start at 9. I'm here about Marcus Johnson, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I received a call that he's been transferred. The sergeant tapped lazily at his keyboard. Johnson, yeah, he's not here anymore. Where is he? He shrugged. Above my pay grade. I leaned across the desk, my patience evaporating. I need to speak to whoever authorized the transfer, now. Something in my tone must have registered. The sergeant straightened, finally looking at me properly. I'll call the warden. The wait felt endless. Every second that ticked by was another second Marcus was gone, taken somewhere unknown. I paced the small lobby, unable to stand still while my son's life hung in the balance. 15 minutes later, a heavy door buzzed open. A tall man with a military-style crew cut and permanent frown lines emerged. Warden Hicks. He introduced himself with a curt nod. You're asking about Johnson? Where is my son? I demanded. The warden's expression remained impassive. There was a security concern. He's been moved to a protective relocation. What security concern? Where exactly has he been relocated? That information is classified for his own protection. I stepped closer. I'm his father. I have a right to know. You have a right to know he's in custody, Hicks corrected. The specifics of that custody are at the discretion of the Department of Corrections. Lorraine appeared at my side, her voice deceptively calm. Warden Hicks, I'm Lorraine King, Mr. Johnson's legal representative. Under state law, you're required to provide us with the location of his incarceration. Hicks's eyes narrowed slightly. Ms. King, I've heard of you. It wasn't a compliment. As I said, this was a protective measure. The paperwork's still being processed. Check back in a few days. A few days? I nearly shouted. My son is 18 years old and hasn't even been convicted of anything. Which is why we're taking extra precautions, Hicks replied smoothly. There was a credible threat to his safety within general population. What threat? I demanded. The warden's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's 4 a.m. He turned to leave, but I moved to block his path. This isn't over. Sir, he said quietly, I suggest you step aside before I have you removed for threatening a corrections officer. Lorraine's hand on my arm pulled me back. We're leaving, she said firmly. Thank you for your time, Warden. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I slumped against Lorraine's car, the weight of desperation crushing my chest. They've hidden him, I said, my voice breaking. They've taken my son and hidden him. Lorraine was already on her phone. Give me a minute, she muttered, stepping away. I stared at the jail, imagining Marcus being loaded into a van in the middle of the night, terrified and alone. What had they told him? Where had they taken him? The questions circled like vultures, each one tearing at my sanity. Lorraine returned 5 minutes later, her expression grim. I called in a favor from Sam Townsend, she said. He's a retired U.S. Marshal, still has connections in the system. And, she hesitated. It's not good. Marcus has been transferred to what they call the county farm, a minimum security work facility about 40 miles from here. That doesn't sound so bad, I said, grasping at hope. It's not what it sounds like. Lorraine's voice dropped. It's off the books, barely monitored by state oversight. They send problem inmates there, people they want to disappear for a while. My blood ran cold. What happens to them? Accidents, fights, inmates who try to escape and get shot. Official reports always say the same thing. Unfortunate incidents, no foul play. I felt my knees weaken. They're going to kill him. Not if we move fast, Lorraine said. Sam says we have about 72 hours before Marcus becomes officially missing in the system. That's their pattern. 3 days before an inmate has an accident or escapes. 3 days. 72 hours to find my son before Grissom's people made him disappear permanently. We need to get to that farm, I said. We will, but not blindly. Sam's working on getting us the exact location and security details. Lorraine's eyes were steel. This isn't just about freeing Marcus anymore. We need to take down Grissom's entire operation. I nodded, a cold clarity replacing my panic. This wasn't just about a corrupt judge anymore. This was about a system designed to murder my son and make it look like an accident. In that moment, standing in the parking lot as the sun began to rise, I made a silent vow. I would dismantle Grissom's empire brick by brick, expose every corrupt deal, every kickback, every rigged case. I would blow the whole thing wide open, and God help anyone who stood between me and my son. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with images of Marcus alone in some godforsaken farm, surrounded by God knows who. By 6 in the morning, I was back at Lorraine's kitchen table, surrounded by files and a laptop displaying county property records. Here's our list, Lorraine said, sliding a paper toward me. 17 families who've had loved ones railroaded through Grissom's court in the last 3 years alone. I scanned the names, my stomach turning. So many young men. Mostly Black and Latino, Lorraine confirmed, her voice tight. All pressured into guilty pleas for minimal offenses, all sent to the same private prison company. Where Grissom's brother-in-law sits on the board, I added, connecting dots we'd discovered the night before. Exactly. Lorraine tapped her pen against the table. We need to split these up, get statements from as many families as possible. Raw, detailed accounts of how Grissom manipulated their cases. I nodded, already reaching for my phone. I'll take the first 8. You take the rest? Deal. She paused. But remember, we're not just gathering sob stories. We need specific details, exact quotes from Grissom, threats made by bailiffs, anything that proves a pattern of judicial misconduct. For the next 12 hours, we worked like people possessed. I drove across town, meeting parents in coffee shops, siblings in parking lots, grandmothers on front porches. Their stories made my blood boil. A 19-year-old sent away for 6 years over a bag of marijuana. A college student who lost his scholarship after being framed for stealing a laptop. A 17-year-old who spent 9 months in jail before charges were quietly dropped. With each conversation, I felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. These weren't just statistics or case files anymore. They were families torn apart, futures destroyed, lives permanently altered by Grissom's greed. By evening, I met Lorraine back at her place, my notepad filled with testimonies. I've got something else, she said, gesturing to her computer screen. Financial records. Took some digging, but there's a pattern of deposits to Grissom's offshore account that coincide perfectly with sentencings. I leaned in, studying the numbers. This is it. This is the smoking gun. Almost, Lorraine cautioned. We need someone to help us break this wide open. I've reached out to Eliza Sanderson at the Tribune. She's been trying to crack Grissom's operation for years. Can we trust her? As much as we can trust anyone right now. Lorraine checked her watch. She's meeting us at Riverside Park in an hour. Neutral ground, away from prying eyes. The park was nearly empty when we arrived, just a few late-night joggers and a couple walking their dog. Eliza was already waiting on a bench near the water, a slender woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Ms. King," she said, standing as we approached, "and you must be Mr. Johnson." I nodded, scanning our surroundings instinctively. "Let's walk," Eliza suggested. "Harder for anyone to eavesdrop." As we strolled along the riverbank, Lorraine laid out what we'd discovered: the pattern of coerced pleas, the financial kickbacks, the mysterious county farm, where inmates disappeared. Eliza listened intently, occasionally stopping to jot notes. "This is exactly what I've suspected for years but could never prove. If you've got the documentation to back this up." "We do," I assured her. "Financial records, victim testimonies, court transcripts, everything you need." "I can run this," she said finally. "But I'll need 48 hours to verify everything independently. My editor won't touch it otherwise." "We don't have 48 hours, I said, tension edging my voice. "My son could be—" My phone buzzed in my pocket, cutting me off. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Back off." The voice was electronically distorted, barely recognizable as human. "Back off now, or your boy won't make it to morning." My blood turned to ice. Who is this? "Consider this your only warning. The file stays closed or Marcus joins it. Permanently." The line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. "What is it?" Lorraine asked, her hand on my arm. I lowered the phone slowly. "They're threatening Marcus. They know we're investigating." Eliza's expression hardened. "This changes things. Threats against a minor. We can expedite the story." "No," I said, my mind racing. "If they publish now before we've secured Marcus—" "He's right," Lorraine agreed. "We need to move faster, but not through the press. Not yet." She turned to me, her eyes blazing with determination. "I know a judge on the federal circuit, Judge Winters. She owes me a favor and she's incorruptible. We can request an emergency hearing, present our evidence, and get a federal order to locate and protect Marcus." "Will she do it?" I asked, hope and desperation warring in my chest. "She will if I testify personally," Lorraine said firmly. "I'll lay out everything I know about Grissom's operation. Decades of observations, case patterns, the whole corrupt system." "When?" I demanded. "Tomorrow morning. I'll call her tonight." Lorraine squeezed my arm. "We'll get him back, I promise." I nodded, trying to believe her. The threat still echoed in my ears, but I refused to be intimidated. They wanted me to back off, to abandon my son to their mercy. That wasn't going to happen. "Do it," I told Lorraine. "Set up the hearing. I'll bring everything we've gathered." As we parted ways with Eliza, who promised to hold the story until we gave her the green light, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The threat had only confirmed what I already knew. We were on the right track and Grissom was getting desperate. Let him threaten, let him scheme. I was coming for my son, and heaven help anyone who stood in my way. I drove Lorraine to the federal courthouse at dawn, the sky still a deep purple above us. We'd been up all night preparing, organizing documents, rehearsing her testimony. The folder on her lap contained decades of evidence against Judge Grissom. Enough, we hoped, to secure an emergency federal order to locate and protect Marcus. "You ready for this?" I asked, glancing over at her. Lorraine nodded, her silver hair catching the first rays of sunlight. "Been ready for 30 years, son. Vernon Grissom has been destroying lives since I was a young attorney. Today, we start bringing it all down." I admired her confidence, wished I could feel the same. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, I was a hurricane of fear and rage. Somewhere out there, my boy was alone, possibly hurt, definitely scared. Every minute that passed felt like another chance for Grissom to make good on his threat. We parked in the underground garage and found a quiet corner near the elevators to review one last time. Judge Winters will hear us in chambers, Lorraine explained, spreading the documents on the hood of my car. No clerks, no stenographer, just us and her. Total confidentiality until she issues the order. And she's trustworthy? I couldn't help asking. After what we'd discovered, I trusted no one in the system. Winters is solid gold. We clerked together back in the Stone Age. Lorraine tapped a document with her finger. Now let's go through the timeline once more. We need to be airtight on these dates. We cross-checked every document, every testimony, every financial record. Lorraine was meticulous, pointing out connections I hadn't even noticed. The pattern was undeniable. Young defendants, mostly black and Hispanic, railroaded through Grissom's court, pressured into guilty pleas without proper representation, then sent to private prisons where Grissom held financial interests. This is the smoking gun, Lorraine said, holding up a bank statement. Quarterly payments from Blackwater Correctional to an offshore account linked to Grissom. $5,000 per inmate per quarter. I shook my head in disgust. He's selling people. For decades, she confirmed grimly. And your son is just his latest merchandise. We gathered everything back into the folder and headed for the elevator. Lorraine checked her watch. We've got 15 minutes. Perfect timing. As the elevator doors opened on the 5th floor, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Judge Winters could issue a federal protection order. We could get marshals searching for Marcus within the hour. We could... You all right? I asked, noticing Lorraine's suddenly unsteady step as we walked down the hallway. She waved me off. Just tired, haven't pulled an all-nighter since law school. But something was wrong. Her breathing had changed, becoming shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the building's chill. Lorraine? I touched her arm. She stopped walking, blinking rapidly. Her hand went to her throat. Something's... Then it happened so fast. Her knees buckled, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed against me. I caught her weight, lowering her gently to the floor. Help! I shouted down the empty hallway. Somebody help us. Lorraine's face had gone ash gray, her lips taking on a bluish tint. Her body convulsed once, twice. Lorraine, stay with me. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Her hand clutched at my sleeve with surprising strength. Don't, she gasped. Don't stop. Help is coming, I promised, hearing doors opening, footsteps running toward us. No. Her eyes locked on mine with fierce intensity. Don't stop. Fighting. He'll kill you all. A security guard skidded to his knees beside us. What happened? I don't know. She just collapsed. I think she's been poisoned. The words left my mouth before I'd even consciously formed the thought, but I knew it was true. This was no coincidence. No natural medical emergency. Lorraine's grip on my sleeve weakened. The files, she whispered. Safe, deposit box, key in, my office, behind the Thurgood Marshall photo. Ma'am, try not to talk, the guard said, pressing fingers to her neck to check her pulse. But Lorraine wasn't listening to him. Her eyes, growing dimmer by the second, stayed fixed on mine. Promise me. I promise, I whispered, throat tight with horror and grief. Her eyes closed then, her body going limp. The security guard started CPR as more people arrived. Courthouse staff, a judge in robes, finally EMTs with a stretcher and equipment. I was pushed back, the folder of evidence still clutched in my hands as they worked on her. I heard snatches of their urgent communication. No pulse? Possible toxin? Get an airway. But I already knew. They had gotten to her. Somehow they had poisoned Lorraine. The EMTs loaded her onto the stretcher, still performing CPR as they rushed her toward the elevator. I moved to follow, but a court officer blocked my path. Sir, I need you to stay here. The police will want to talk to you. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching the elevator doors close on Lorraine's still form. The folder in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I was alone now, completely, utterly alone. My son was missing. My only ally was dying or dead, and somewhere Judge Grissom was probably smiling, thinking he'd won, that I would back down now, too frightened to continue. He didn't know me at all. I paced outside the hospital's emergency entrance, each step wearing a deeper groove in the concrete. The ambulance had screamed away from the courthouse with Lorraine inside, and I'd followed in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. But they wouldn't let me in. Family only, they'd said, as if Lorraine had any family left in this world. A doctor had come out an hour ago, his face already arranged in that practiced expression of sympathy. "I'm sorry," he'd said. "The toxin was fast-acting. There was nothing we could do." Now I stood alone in the fading daylight, my shadow stretching long across the parking lot. The weight of it all crashed down on me at once. Lorraine was dead. Marcus was missing. And I was just one man against a system that had already proven it would kill to protect itself. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered with a hollow, "Hello." "Drop it," said a voice low and menacing, "or your boy won't make it through the night." The line went dead before I could respond. I leaned against my car, legs suddenly unable to support my weight. My chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. What was I thinking? I was no hero. I was just a father who couldn't even protect his own son. Every move I made seemed to put Marcus in greater danger. Maybe I should walk away, go home, wait for Grissom to call with his demands. Surely he'd want something from me. Money, influence, my resignation. Whatever it was, I'd give it. I'd give anything if it meant Marcus would come home alive. I slid down until I was sitting on the asphalt, back against my car's tire. The folder of evidence sat beside me, Lorraine's last contribution to a fight she'd given her life for. What good was justice if it cost me my son? My phone buzzed again with a notification. It was a memory from 3 years ago, Marcus's high school graduation. I'd set up these automated reminders during happier times. I opened it with trembling fingers. There was Marcus, grinning in his cap and gown, his arm thrown around my shoulders. His eyes shone with pride and possibility. I remembered that day like it was yesterday, how he'd given a speech about justice and equality, quoting Thurgood Marshall and making the whole auditorium rise to their feet. "Dad," he'd said later as we celebrated at home, "I want to be like you someday, fighting for what's right, no matter how hard it gets." Another memory surfaced. Marcus at 8 years old, sitting in my lap as I read him bedtime stories about civil rights heroes. His small voice asking, "Did they ever get scared, Daddy?" "Of course they did," I'd told him. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified." I closed my eyes, remembering the sacrifices we'd both made to get here. The birthdays I'd missed while arguing cases. The weekends Marcus spent studying instead of playing. The way his mother had looked at me before she left, saying I cared more about justice than family. She'd been wrong. I cared about justice because of family, because I wanted Marcus to inherit a world better than the one I'd grown up in. And now Grissom wanted me to choose justice or Marcus, as if I could save one by abandoning the other. Number. There was a third option, one that Grissom hadn't counted on. I pushed myself to my feet, grabbed the folder, and got in my car. I knew what I had to do now. 40 minutes later, I pulled up to a small cabin nestled in the woods outside of town. Few people knew about this place. I'd purchased it under a shell company years ago as a retreat, somewhere to decompress between high-profile cases. I hadn't been here in months. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. I went straight to the bedroom closet and pushed aside the hanging clothes. Behind them was a small safe built into the wall. I entered the combination, Marcus's birthday, and pulled it open. Inside lay my Supreme Court robe, carefully folded. Beside it, my official identification badge and credentials. I'd kept them separate from my everyday life, part of my careful compartmentalization. In town, I was just Marcus's dad, a private citizen. My position on the nation's highest court was something I discussed rarely, if ever. It had started as a security measure, then became a way to give Marcus a normal life. But now that separation had become a liability. Grissom had no idea who he was really dealing with, the power and connections I could bring to bear. I lifted the robe from the safe, feeling its weight in my hands. The black fabric represented everything I'd worked for, everything I believed in. It wasn't just a symbol of my authority. It was a reminder of my oath to uphold justice. I laid it carefully on the bed, then retrieved my phone. There were calls to make, people who owed me favors, colleagues who would move heaven and earth once they understood what was happening. No more hiding, I said aloud to the empty room. No more playing by their rules. I slipped the robe on, feeling its familiar weight settle across my shoulders. In the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Gone was the desperate father from the hospital parking lot. In his place stood a Supreme Court justice, one of the 9 most powerful legal authorities in the nation. Grissom thought he was fighting a grieving father. He was about to discover he'd picked a fight with the wrong man. I straightened my shoulders and reached for my phone. It was time to bring the full weight of federal justice down on Vernon Grissom's head. I parked my car 3 blocks from the courthouse, my hand still trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The garment bag lay across the passenger seat, containing the most powerful weapon I possessed, my identity. I checked my watch. 8:42 a.m. Court would convene at 9 a.m. For a moment I sat motionless, gathering my strength. I thought of Marcus, alone and terrified in some hidden county farm. I thought of Lorraine, poisoned for daring to stand against corruption. I thought of all the nameless victims in those case files, young lives crushed under Grissom's gavel. Enough, I whispered, grabbing the garment bag and stepping out of the car. The morning air hit my face, cool and crisp. I walked with measured steps toward the courthouse, choosing the side entrance where deliveries were made. A few courthouse employees glanced my way, but no one stopped me. I was just another visitor with business inside. The side entrance was quieter, used mainly by staff. I nodded to a security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made my way down the hallway, searching for a restroom away from the main corridors. I found one tucked away near the file storage rooms, small, dingy, and rarely used. Perfect. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. The fluorescent light flickered overhead as I unzipped the garment bag. There it was, my Supreme Court robe, the black fabric almost gleaming under the harsh light. I ran my fingers across the material, feeling its weight and significance. I removed my jacket and tie, hanging them carefully on the hook behind the door. Then I lifted the robe from its bag and slipped it over my shoulders. The transformation was immediate and profound. A cracked mirror hung above the sink, and I caught my reflection in it. The man staring back at me wasn't just Marcus's father anymore. He was Justice of the United States Supreme Court, one of 9 individuals entrusted with interpreting the highest law of the land. For Marcus, I whispered to my reflection. For justice. I gathered my civilian clothes, tucking them into the now empty garment bag. Checking my watch again, 8:53. I took a deep breath and unlocked the bathroom door. The hallway was still quiet. I walked with purpose now, my robe flowing behind me with each step. A clerk coming around the corner stopped dead in her tracks, mouth falling open as she recognized what the robe signified. I nodded to her and continued on. Word traveled fast. By the time I reached the main corridor, people were stopping to stare. Whispers erupted in my wake. A bailiff took one look at me and snapped to attention, unsure of the protocol but recognizing authority when he saw it. I approached the doors to courtroom 3, Grissom's domain. Through the small windows, I could see the room was already filling. Grissom sat at his bench, shuffling papers with that perpetual smirk on his face. He believed he'd won. He thought Marcus was as good as gone, and the pesky father who'd tried to interfere had been effectively neutralized. He had no idea what was about to hit him. I waited just outside as the bailiff called the court to order. The familiar ritual played out on the other side of the doors. All rise! The Honorable Judge Vernon Grissom presiding in the Circuit Court of... I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversation died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Gasps rippled across the room like a wave. Someone dropped a legal pad with a loud slap against the floor. I walked down the center aisle, my robe billowing slightly with each step. The silence was absolute now, broken only by my footfalls on the worn carpet. Grissom hadn't noticed at first, busy arranging his papers. When the unusual silence finally registered, he looked up with annoyance and froze. The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly pulled from water. The smirk vanished, replaced by naked fear as recognition dawned in his eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" he finally managed, his voice cracking. I continued forward until I stood directly before the bench. When I spoke, my voice carried to every corner of the hushed courtroom. "Judge Vernon Grissom, I am Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. I am here concerning grave violations of federal law, corruption of justice, and the unlawful detention of my son, Marcus." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The court reporter's fingers hovered motionless above her stenotype. The prosecutor half rose from his chair, then sank back down, uncertain. Grissom's face had gone from white to gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's chill. His eyes darted left and right, seeking escape where there was none. This is highly irregular," he stammered. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is my courtroom." I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. "No, Judge Grissom. This is America's courtroom, and you have perverted its purpose long enough." I held his gaze, watching as the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. This wasn't just a father fighting for his son anymore. This was the federal judiciary itself, standing before him, demanding answers. I stepped up to the bench, never breaking eye contact with the man who had tried to destroy my son. I stood before Grissom's bench, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom on me. The silence was so complete you could have heard a tear drop. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice remained steady, fortified by righteous fury. "This court will come to order," I announced, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I am invoking federal oversight under Title 28 of the United States Code, Section 455, which mandates judicial recusal in cases of demonstrable bias and corruption." Grissom's face contorted with rage and panic. "You have no authority to—" "I have every authority," I cut him off, my words slicing through his protest. "As a justice of the Supreme Court, I am formally convening an emergency evidentiary hearing regarding systemic judicial misconduct in this district." I turned to face the stunned courtroom. Among the spectators, I recognized families of other young men who'd been railroaded through Grissom's court. They stared at me with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. "For years," I continued, "this court has operated as a personal fiefdom rather than a hall of justice. Young men, primarily of color, have been coerced into false guilty pleas, denied proper counsel, and sentenced to excessive terms in private correctional facilities in which Judge Grissom holds financial interests." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A woman in the back row covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Grissom slammed his gavel down. "This is preposterous. I will not allow these unfounded accusations in my courtroom." Unfounded? I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I have here signed affidavits from 17 former defendants who were denied counsel and pressured into guilty pleas in direct violation of their Sixth Amendment rights." I placed the folder on the evidence table with a heavy thud. "I also have here—" I produced a second folder. "Financial records documenting regular payments from Southland Correctional Holdings to offshore accounts linked directly to you, Judge Grissom. Payments that coincide precisely with increases in sentencing rates from this court." The courtroom erupted in whispers. I could feel the atmosphere shifting from shock to outrage. "This is absurd," Grissom sputtered, his face now crimson. "Those documents are fabricated. You have no proof." "The proof is extensive and meticulously documented," I replied, laying out a third folder. "These are the original case files for 23 defendants, including my son. Files that were subsequently altered in the official court record to remove evidence of constitutional violations." I opened the folder to reveal side-by-side comparisons of the original documents and their tampered counterparts. Note the discrepancies in dates, the removal of requests for counsel, and the altered plea entries. The court reporter had stopped typing, her mouth slightly open. The prosecutor was frantically flipping through his own files, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead. "And finally," I said, producing a USB drive, "this contains a complete audit trail of the county's case management system, showing unauthorized access and alterations to hundreds of case files over the past 5 years. all traced back to this courthouse. The whispers had grown louder now, becoming a rumble of anger and disbelief. "My son!" a woman suddenly cried out from the gallery. "You sent my boy away for 10 years on a first offense." "Mine too," called another voice. 18 years old, and he never even got to talk to a lawyer. The dam had broken. More voices joined in, years of suppressed grievances pouring forth in a flood of accusation. Grissom pounded his gavel repeatedly, his face contorted with rage. "Order! I will have order in this court." But it was too late. The truth was spreading through the room like wildfire, igniting long-buried anger and pain. I felt it then, a deep electric surge of justice beginning to rise, not just for Marcus, but for all the young lives this man had casually destroyed. This was what I had sworn an oath to protect. The law as a shield for the innocent, not a weapon for the corrupt. But I knew this was just the beginning. Grissom wouldn't go down without a fight. "This hearing is adjourned," Grissom shouted over the growing tumult. "Bailiff, remove this man from my courtroom immediately." 2 deputies moved hesitantly toward me, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of laying hands on a Supreme Court justice. I stood my ground. "I wouldn't advise that, gentlemen." Grissom's face twisted with fury. "This is my courthouse. Deputies, I ordered you to remove him." The deputies exchanged uncertain glances, taking another reluctant step forward. I raised my hand. "Before you make a career-ending mistake, you should know that federal marshals are already en route with warrants for Judge Grissom's financial records and case files." As if on cue, the courtroom doors swung open. The deputies froze, turning to look. Grissom's face drained of color as he realized his authority was evaporating before his eyes. The empire he'd built on corruption and fear was beginning to crumble, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The sound of screeching tires cut through the courtroom's chaos. I strode to the window just in time to see 3 black SUVs with government plates pull up sharply to the courthouse steps. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched federal marshals pour out of the vehicles, their windbreakers emblazoned with bold yellow letters. "Looks like your time's up, Grissom," I said, turning back to face him. Grissom's face had gone from red to ashen in seconds. He stood frozen behind his bench, knuckles white as he gripped his gavel. The courtroom had fallen into a stunned silence, broken only by the heavy footfalls of approaching federal agents. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, but his voice had lost its authority. "You can't just—" The courtroom doors burst open. 8 marshals in tactical gear streamed in, weapons holstered but hands ready. Their leader, a stern-faced woman with cropped silver hair, stepped forward. "Judge Vernon Grissom," she announced, her voice ringing through the silent room. "We have federal warrants for your arrest on charges of racketeering, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations." Cameras flashed from the back of the courtroom. I hadn't noticed the reporters filing in, but now I saw them. At least 3 news crews, their cameras trained on Grissom's face as it crumpled in disbelief. Lorraine's contacts had come through, even without her to guide them. "This is my courtroom," Grissom shouted, slamming his gavel down. "You have no jurisdiction here." 2 deputies moved to flank him, hands hovering near their weapons. The tension in the room thickened instantly. "Stand down," I ordered the deputies. "Don't make this worse than it already is." One of them, younger with nervous eyes, immediately backed away. The other, a burly man with a crew cut, hesitated. "Sir," the marshal commander said to the remaining deputy, "interfering with a federal arrest is a felony. I suggest you reconsider." The courtroom had become a powder keg. I could feel sweat trickling down my back under the heavy robes. Suddenly, Grissom bolted. He lunged for a door behind his bench, his private exit to chambers. The movement was so unexpected that for a split second, everyone froze. "Stop him," the marshal commander shouted. Two agents sprinted forward, but Grissom had already disappeared through the door. I moved without thinking, racing around the bench and through the same door. Behind me, I heard the thunder of boots as the marshals followed. Grissom's chambers were opulent, all dark wood and leather, but I barely registered the details as I caught sight of him fumbling with a side door that presumably led to a hallway. "It's over, Grissom," I called out. He whirled to face me, his eyes wild with panic. "You don't understand what you're doing," he hissed. "I have connections, people who'll make sure you never see that boy again." My blood ran cold, but before I could respond, the marshals burst into the room behind me. Grissom turned back to the door, yanking it open, but 2 more agents were already coming through from the other side. Cornered, Grissom made one desperate lunge toward a gap between the agents. The marshal commander moved with surprising speed for her age, tackling him mid-stride. They crashed into an ornate bookcase, sending leather-bound volumes cascading to the floor. "Vernon Grissom, you are under arrest," she said, her knee firmly in his back as she secured handcuffs around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." I stood there, chest heaving, watching as the man who had wielded so much corrupt power was reduced to a sputtering, handcuffed figure on the floor of his own chambers. Through the open door, I could see camera flashes as photographers captured the moment. "Get him up," the commander ordered, and 2 marshals hauled Grissom to his feet. As they led him past me, our eyes met. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by naked fear and something else, something calculating. "Where is my son?" I demanded, stepping into his path. Grissom's lips twisted into a smile that made my skin crawl. "Who knows? Accidents happen all the time at that old farm. Maybe he fell into the river. Maybe he tried to escape." I grabbed him by his silk tie, pulling him close despite the marshal's protests. "Where is he?" "Your Honor," the marshal commander said firmly, placing a hand on my arm. "We'll find your son. But this isn't the way." I released Grissom's tie, my hand shaking with barely controlled rage. The marshals continued leading him away, but he called back over his shoulder. "Tick-tock, Justice Man, that boy of yours is running out of time." I stood there, adrenaline coursing through me as they took him away. The victory felt hollow with Marcus still missing. Through the chamber's windows, I could see more news vans arriving, reporters swarming the courthouse steps. The story was breaking wide open, Grissom's empire crumbling in real time. But none of it mattered if I couldn't find Marcus. I turned to the marshal commander. "We need to find the county farm where they're holding my son. Grissom has been using it as a dumping ground for inmates he wants to silence." She nodded grimly. "We've got people looking into all county properties already. But if you have any information that could narrow it down—" "I need to see Grissom's phone records, his emails, everything," I said. "There has to be communication about the transfer." "We'll get it," she promised. "But it might take time we don't have." I clenched my fists, thinking of Marcus alone and afraid, possibly injured, or worse. Grissom's words echoed in my head. Tick-tock. I watched as they led Grissom to a holding room, his once immaculate suit now disheveled, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth where he'd hit the floor during his failed escape. The marshals had him seated at a metal table, hands still cuffed, while the commander questioned him about Marcus's whereabouts. I stood behind the one-way glass, every muscle in my body tense as I watched Grissom's face. He'd transformed from panicked to smug again, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating smile playing at his bloodied lips. "I've got nothing to say," he drawled, looking directly at the mirror as if he could see me through it. "Lawyer up, remember? Isn't that what you justice types are always preaching?" The marshal commander slammed her palm on the table. "People's lives are at stake, Judge. You want to add accessory to murder to your charges?" Grissom just sneered, blood staining his teeth pink. "Prove it." I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. Every second that passed was another second Marcus might be suffering, or worse. I couldn't wait for Grissom to break. He was too arrogant, too sure of his protection network. I turned to the federal prosecutor who had arrived minutes earlier. "I want search warrants. Every property owned by the county. Every piece of land Grissom has touched. Now." The prosecutor nodded. "Already drafting them. But Judge, there are dozens of properties." "Then we need dozens of teams," I cut in. "Call in state police, neighboring federal offices, everyone. I want boots on the ground at every location within the hour." As the prosecutor hurried away, phone already to his ear, I returned my attention to the interrogation room. Grissom was now examining his fingernails. deliberately ignoring the commander's questions. My hands balled into fists. If I went in there, I wasn't sure I could control myself. A commotion in the hallway drew my attention. Raised voices, the sounds of a scuffle. I stepped out to see what was happening. A woman in her 40s with carefully styled blonde hair was trying to push past two deputies. Her makeup was smeared where tears had cut through it, but her eyes burned with fury. "Let me through," she demanded. "I need to see him." "Ma'am, this is a secure area," one deputy began. "I know exactly what this is," she snapped. "I've been running his damn courtroom for 15 years. I recognized her then. Grissom's court clerk. I'd seen her briefly during that first terrible day when they'd dragged me out of the courtroom. "Let her through," I said. The deputies hesitated, then stepped aside. The woman strode forward, clutching a large manila envelope and what looked like a set of keys. "You're the father," she said, looking me up and down. It wasn't a question. "The justice." I nodded. "And you're Grissom's clerk." "Rebecca Harding," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "And I'm a lot more than his clerk, as I'm sure you've figured out." Understanding dawned. The mistress, the woman who had access to everything Grissom did behind closed doors. She thrust the envelope toward me. "These are my resignation papers. I was going to leave them on his desk, but..." She looked around at the chaos of the courthouse under federal occupation. "I guess that's not necessary anymore." Then she threw the papers to the ground where they scattered across the polished floor. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, or on the reporters who had somehow made their way into the hallway, cameras flashing. "Vernon didn't just frame your son," she said, her voice rising to ensure the journalists caught every word. "He's been doing it for years. Dozens of kids, mostly black and brown, sent away to feed his private prison kickback scheme." Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Rebecca held up the keys and a folded paper she'd pulled from her pocket. "These are the keys to the county farm facilities," she said. "And this is a map to the holding cells they don't put on any official documents. The places they send people they want to disappear." My heart lurched in my chest. "My son..." "Your son was transferred there yesterday," she confirmed, handing me the map. "Vernon was furious when he realized who you were. He called his contact at the farm and told them to make the problem go away by morning." I unfolded the map with shaking hands. There it was, a crude drawing of buildings tucked away on county property, with one structure circled in red ink. Scrawled beside it, "Isolation cells." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Rebecca's eyes hardened. "Because I've been helping him destroy lives for 15 years and I can't live with it anymore. Because your son isn't the first, but I want him to be the last." I nodded, understanding the weight of her confession and her redemption. "Commander," I called out. The marshal in charge stepped forward immediately. "We have a location." Within minutes, a convoy was assembled. Black SUVs lined up outside the courthouse, lights flashing but sirens silent. We couldn't risk alerting anyone at the farm that we were coming. I climbed into the lead vehicle with the commander and two tactical agents. "How far?" she asked as we pulled away from the curb. I studied the map Rebecca had given me. 30 miles northwest, near the county line. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, the driver promised, accelerating onto the highway. Night had fallen, and our headlights cut through the darkness as we sped toward the farm. I stared out the window, watching the lights of the town recede behind us. Somewhere ahead in the darkness was Marcus, my son, the child I'd sworn to protect. The convoy of black vehicles roared down the highway into the night. The farm materialized out of the darkness like something from a nightmare. Our headlights swept across dilapidated buildings scattered across overgrown fields. The whole place bathed in the blood-red glow of the setting sun. I'd seen some grim places in my years on the bench, but something about this isolated compound made my skin crawl. "Kill the lights," the commander ordered as we approached. "We go in quiet." The SUVs rolled to a stop behind a ridge about a quarter-mile from the main building. Agents in tactical gear poured out, checking weapons and communication devices. Someone handed me a bulletproof vest. "Sir, you should wait here," the commander suggested. I fixed her with the same stare I'd used to silence unruly attorneys in my courtroom. "That's my son in there." She nodded once, understanding. "Stay behind the tactical team. If there's resistance..." "I understand." We moved across the field in formation, keeping low. The sunset painted everything in shades of crimson and shadow, making the farm look like it was drenched in blood. As we drew closer, the smell hit me. Mold, rot, and something else. Fear, the unmistakable scent of human misery. The first building was empty, just rusted farm equipment and rodent droppings. The second housed what looked like administrative offices, but they'd been hastily cleared out. Papers were scattered across the floor, file cabinets standing open. "They knew we were coming," one of the agents muttered. My heart sank. If they'd moved Marcus again, well, we split into 3 teams to cover more ground. I stayed with the commander as we approached a long, low building that resembled a dormitory. Inside, we found rows of empty bunks. The mattresses were stained, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies. "This is where they kept the general population," the commander said, her voice tight with disgust. "Where would they keep someone they wanted to isolate?" I asked, thinking of Rebecca's map. The commander studied the property layout on her tablet. "There's a cluster of outbuildings behind the main barn. Could be storage, could be isolation cells." We regrouped outside and moved toward the barn. With each empty building, my desperation grew. Marcus had to be here. He had to be alive. The alternative was unthinkable. Behind the barn, just as the map had indicated, stood a row of small sheds. They looked like they might once have been used for equipment storage, but heavy padlocks had been added to each door. "Spread out," the commander ordered. "Check every building." I moved to the furthest shed, the one that had been circled on Rebecca's map. The padlock was new, incongruously shiny against the weathered wood. An agent stepped forward with bolt cutters, but I was already swinging the butt of the flashlight I'd been given. The lock broke on the 3rd hit. I yanked the door open and swept my light across the interior. The beam caught on something in the corner, a huddled form on a thin mattress. My breath caught in my throat. "Marcus?" My voice came out as a whisper. The figure stirred slightly. I heard it then, weak, rasping breaths. "In here!" I shouted to the agents. "I found him!" I rushed inside, dropping to my knees beside the mattress. It was Marcus, but barely recognizable. His face was swollen, one eye completely shut. Dried blood crusted his nose and split lip. His t-shirt was torn, revealing bruises across his ribs. "Dad?" His voice was a croak, disbelieving. "I'm here, son. I'm here." Tears blurred my vision as I gathered him gently into my arms. He felt lighter somehow, as if the past days had worn away at his very substance. "I've got you now. You're safe." He clutched at my shirt with weak fingers. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter. We're going home." I helped him sit up, noticing how he winced with every movement. Rage boiled inside me at what they'd done to him, but I pushed it down. There would be time for justice later. Right now, all that mattered was getting Marcus to safety. "Can you stand?" I asked. He nodded uncertainly. I slipped my arm under his shoulders, supporting his weight as he struggled to his feet. That's when I heard it, a faint scuffing sound from the corner of the shed. My head snapped up, scanning the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. A shadow moved. Someone had been hiding in the far corner all along, watching us. "Federal agents!" the commander called from just outside the door. "Come out with your hands up!" Instead of compliance, I saw the glint of metal as the figure raised his arm. A farm hand in dirty overalls, his face twisted with fear and hatred, and in his hand, a gun aimed directly at us. Time slowed. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the muzzle pointed at Marcus's chest. I didn't think. I moved on pure instinct, spinning to place my body between my son and the threat. I pushed Marcus down and covered him with my own body, bracing for the impact I knew was coming. "Dad, no!" Marcus cried out beneath me. The sound of the gunshot exploded through the small space. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder, but the pain I expected never came. Instead, more shots followed, rapid, controlled bursts that weren't coming from the farmhand. I kept my body pressed over Marcus, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the chaos to end, my heartbeat thundering in my ears as I tried to shield him with every inch of my frame. "Clear!" a voice shouted. "Suspect down!" I lifted my head cautiously, dust and splinters falling from my hair. Federal agents had flooded the small shed, their weapons trained on the farmhand who now lay motionless on the dirt floor. The gun had fallen from his limp fingers, a dark pool spreading beneath him. "Are you hit, sir?" An agent was at my side, scanning us both for injuries, his face tense with professional concern. I patted myself down quickly, checking for warm spots or wetness that might indicate a bullet wound, then turned to Marcus. "Are you okay? Did he get you?" My voice came out ragged, desperate. Marcus shook his head weakly. "No, I don't think so." His words were slurred, his split lip making speech painful. My hands trembled as I helped him lie back down. Wood splinters from the bullet-riddled walls had rained down on us, covering Marcus's hair and shoulders like deadly confetti. I brushed them away gently, my fingers lingering on his face, reassuring myself he was truly alive. The bruises looked even worse in the harsh tactical lights the agents had set up. "We need medical in here now," the commander barked into her radio. She was a compact woman with steel in her eyes, already directing her team with sharp efficiency. I cradled Marcus's head in my lap, my heart still hammering against my ribs. "Just breathe, son. Help is coming." I stroked his forehead, avoiding the swollen areas, feeling the fever heat of his skin. His good eye fixed on me, confusion swimming in its depths. The other was swollen completely shut, a testament to the beatings he'd endured. "How did you find me?" "I never stopped looking," I said, my voice breaking. "Not for 1 second." I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. "I would have torn this whole county apart to get to you." The paramedics arrived in a rush of equipment and urgent voices. They gently moved me aside, their practiced hands assessing Marcus's condition with brisk efficiency. I stood back, suddenly feeling helpless as they worked. "Multiple contusions, possible broken ribs, dehydration," one reported to his partner. "BP's low but stable. Possible internal bleeding in the abdominal cavity." I hovered at the edge of their work, unwilling to step too far away. My gaze never left Marcus's face as they inserted an IV, applied an oxygen mask, and carefully transferred him to a backboard. Every wince, every small gasp of pain from him felt like a knife in my chest. "Sir," a female paramedic touched my arm. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense face. "Are you his father?" "Yes," I answered, the word catching in my throat. It had never felt more important, more definitive of who I was. "He's going to need surgery for internal bleeding, but his vitals are stronger than I'd expect given his condition. He's a fighter." She gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Pride swelled in my chest. Yes, he is. I'd always known it, but seeing him survive this hell made it undeniable. They lifted the backboard, preparing to carry Marcus out. I moved alongside them, my hand finding his. His fingers were cold, but they curled weakly around mine, holding on. That small gesture of connection nearly undid me completely. Outside, the farm had transformed into a scene of organized chaos. More federal vehicles had arrived, their lights painting the night in alternating red and blue. Agents were leading handcuffed staff members to transport vans. Others were escorting dazed-looking young men, more prisoners, I realized with a sick feeling. How many lives had Grissom destroyed here? How many families torn apart by his corruption? The paramedics loaded Marcus into the waiting ambulance. I climbed in after him, settling on the bench beside the stretcher. As they hooked him up to monitors, I took his hand again, rubbing my thumb across his knuckles the way I used to when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms or bad dreams. "Dad," Marcus whispered, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask. He struggled to lift it away, his movements weak but determined. "Shh, don't try to talk," I said. But he persisted, fighting against his own exhaustion. "You came for me." His words were barely audible, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. There was wonder in his voice, as if some part of him had doubted I would find him. That realization broke something inside me. "I will always come for you," I promised, my vision blurring with tears. Always. I meant it with every fiber of my being. A ghost of a smile crossed his battered face before his eye drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming him. I kept hold of his hand, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, overwhelmed with gratitude for each breath he took. The beeping monitors provided a comforting rhythm, proof of life continuing. The paramedic across from me checked Marcus's vitals again. "We're ready to transport." I nodded and the ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed to life as we pulled away from the farm, heading toward the nearest trauma center. The vehicle swayed as it navigated the rutted farm road, and I braced myself to keep Marcus stable. Through the rear windows I could see news vans arriving, reporters spilling out with cameras and microphones. The story was breaking. By morning, everyone would know what had happened here. The corruption, the violence, the lives ruined by one man's greed. Grissom's empire was beginning to crumble in real time. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, all that mattered was the hand in mine, the pulse beneath my fingers, the miracle that Marcus was alive. I couldn't take my eyes off his face, afraid that if I looked away even for a moment, he might disappear again. As we sped through the darkness, I made another silent promise, not just to Marcus, but to every person who had suffered in that place. Grissom wouldn't just lose his position or face jail time. When I was finished, his entire corrupt empire would be dismantled brick by rotten brick. No one would ever again suffer at his hands. The ambulance raced onward, its siren clearing our path through the night, carrying us away from the nightmare and toward whatever healing the dawn might bring. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that healing was possible. I stood outside Marcus's hospital room, watching him sleep through the half-open door. Federal agents flanked the entrance, their presence a constant reminder that we weren't fully safe yet. The doctors had repaired his internal bleeding and set his broken ribs. Now it was just a matter of time and rest. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Lorraine's name flashed on the screen. "How are you feeling?" I asked, stepping away from Marcus's door. "Like I've been poisoned," she replied, her voice raspy but determined. "But I'm vertical. They're releasing me this afternoon." "You should be resting." "I'll rest when Grissom is behind bars." She paused. "The arraignment's at 2. I'll meet you there." I glanced back at Marcus. I don't want to leave him. He's got a small army protecting him, and this, her voice hardened. "This is something you need to see. For both of you." She was right. I needed to witness Grissom's fall with my own eyes. "I'll be there," I promised. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and camera crews when I arrived. News of Judge Grissom's arrest had exploded across national headlines. The story had everything: corruption, racism, violence, and the dramatic revelation of a Supreme Court justice going undercover to save his son. I spotted Lorraine waiting at the top of the steps. Even from a distance, I could see how the poisoning had ravaged her. Her skin had a grayish tinge, and she leaned heavily on a cane. But her eyes were bright with fierce determination. "You look terrible," I said as I reached her. She snorted. "Always the charmer. You should see the other guy." Cameras flashed around us as we made our way inside. I kept my hand under Lorraine's elbow, steadying her as we walked. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, victims' families, and curious onlookers. We found seats in the front row. Lorraine sank down with a small sigh of relief. "How's Marcus?" she asked. "Better. The doctors say he'll make a full physical recovery." She caught the unspoken qualifier. "And the rest?" I shook my head slightly. "He wakes up screaming. Thinks he's back in that place." Lorraine's hand found mine, her fingers cool and dry. "He'll heal. You both will. But this..." She nodded toward the front of the courtroom. "This is part of it." The side door opened, and Vernon Grissom shuffled in, shackled at the wrists and ankles. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame. Without his robes and the trappings of his office, he looked smaller, diminished. But when his gaze landed on me, I saw the same cold malice that had nearly destroyed my son. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Marilyn Chen took the bench, her expression grave as she surveyed the packed courtroom. Docket number 2023-CR-1458 United States v. Vernon Grissom, the clerk announced. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Reynolds, stood. Your Honor, the defendant is charged with multiple counts of conspiracy to violate civil rights, judicial misconduct, kidnapping, attempted murder, and racketeering. Judge Chen nodded. How does the defendant plead? Grissom's court-appointed attorney rose. Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lorraine's grip on my hand tightened. Regarding bail, Judge Chen continued, the court will hear arguments. Reynolds stepped forward. Your Honor, the government strongly opposes any bail in this matter. Judge Grissom has demonstrated not only a willingness to obstruct justice, but to actively endanger witnesses. We have evidence that he ordered the poisoning of a key witness, Lorraine King. Lorraine straightened beside me, her chin lifting as all eyes turned toward her. Furthermore, Reynolds continued, we have testimony from Clara Jenkins, the court clerk and Mr. Grissom's former associate, detailing his extensive criminal network and flight risk. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened and Clara Jenkins entered, escorted by federal marshals. Grissom's head whipped around, his face contorting with rage as he saw her. You bitch, he snarled. You lying bitch. Order. Judge Chen slammed her gavel. Mr. Grissom, control yourself or you will be removed. Clara took the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in, but her voice was steady as she began to testify. I worked as Judge Grissom's clerk for 15 years, she said. During that time, I witnessed and, God help me, assisted in his scheme to funnel young defendants, primarily Black and Hispanic males, into the private prison system for kickbacks. The courtroom was utterly silent as she detailed the mechanics of Grissom's operation. The targeted arrests, the intimidation tactics, the falsified paperwork, and the money trail leading back to offshore accounts in Grissom's name. And what about Marcus Washington? Reynolds asked. Clara's eyes flicked to me. Judge Grissom specifically targeted him because of who his father is. He wanted to make an example. You lying whore! Grissom lunged forward, only to be restrained by his guards. You helped me. You were right there. Judge Chen's gavel cracked again. Mr. Grissom, this is your final warning. But Grissom was beyond control now. You think this is over? He shouted, his eyes fixed on me. I still have friends. You and your boy aren't safe. You hear me? This isn't over. Remove the defendant, Judge Chen ordered. As the guards dragged Grissom toward the door, he continued to scream threats. I'll find you, both of you. You're dead men walking. Lorraine squeezed my hand, her expression grim but satisfied as we watched him being hauled away, his threats echoing down the corridor. Judge Chen's voice cut through the chaos. Bail is denied. The defendant will be remanded to federal custody pending trial. The gavel fell with finality, and I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of tension I'd been carrying since that first phone call about Marcus's arrest. Lorraine leaned against me. It's a start, she murmured. I nodded, watching as the courtroom began to empty. It was indeed just a start. Grissom's threats still hung in the air, and Marcus still woke screaming in the night. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I could see a path forward, for justice, for healing, for reclaiming our lives from the shadow of Vernon Grissom. The sentencing hearing came 6 months after Grissom's arrest. 6 months of depositions, evidence gathering, and watching Marcus struggle to reclaim his life. 6 months of nightmares and therapy sessions and small, hard-won victories. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, my back straight, eyes fixed on Grissom as he shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hands and feet shackled. The man who'd once lorded over this courthouse like a king now looked smaller, diminished. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Rodriguez, brought in from another district to ensure impartiality, looked down at Grissom without a trace of sympathy. Vernon Grissom, you have been found guilty of the most egregious abuses of judicial power this court has ever seen, she began, her voice echoing through the packed courtroom. You weaponized the very system designed to protect citizens. You targeted the vulnerable. You enriched yourself by destroying lives." Grissom stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "The court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison," Judge Rodriguez continued. "All assets gained through your criminal enterprise are hereby forfeited. Your license to practice law is permanently revoked." A collective exhale swept through the courtroom. Beside me, Lorraine squeezed my hand. She'd recovered from the poisoning, though she still tired easily. Her testimony had been crucial in securing the conviction. "Furthermore," Judge Rodriguez added, "the court orders full restitution to all identified victims of your scheme and recommends a comprehensive review of every case over which you presided." As the judge finished reading the sentence, I closed my eyes briefly. It was done. Not just for Marcus, but for hundreds of others whose lives Grissom had casually destroyed. Outside the courthouse, families gathered on the steps. Parents, siblings, children of those Grissom had railroaded. Some held photographs of loved ones still incarcerated. Others carried signs demanding justice. When the doors opened and federal marshals led Grissom out toward the transport vehicle, a roar went up from the crowd. I stood to the side watching as Grissom's head ducked lower, his shoulders hunching against the weight of their fury. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowd. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The justice he was facing spoke louder than any words I could offer. As the transport vehicle pulled away, a woman approached me. Her son had been one of Grissom's earliest victims, sentenced to 15 years for a crime he didn't commit. "Thank you," she said simply, gripping my hands in hers. "My boy's coming home next week." Similar encounters followed me for days. Grateful handshakes, tearful hugs, stories of lives derailed and now perhaps with a chance to get back on track. The federal investigation had already identified over 300 cases for immediate review. But while the public saw justice served at home, the healing moved more slowly. Marcus had spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from his injuries. The physical wounds healed faster than the psychological ones. Night terrors, panic attacks when he heard keys jangling or doors slamming, a newfound wariness around strangers. "I keep thinking about the others," he told me one evening as we sat on our back porch. Summer was fading into fall, and the air had a crisp edge to it. The guys who were there longer than me, the ones who didn't have a Supreme Court justice for a father. I nodded, understanding the weight of privilege that had saved him when others remained trapped. "I want to be a lawyer," he said suddenly. I looked at him, surprised. "Really? Even after all this?" "Because of all this," he corrected me. "I want to tear down systems like Grissom's. I want to build something better." Pride swelled in my chest, nearly choking me. "That's a hard road," I warned him. He gave me a half smile. "I've got a pretty good example to follow." We spent the next months focusing on his recovery and education. Marcus threw himself into studying for the LSAT with a determination I'd never seen before. When he wasn't studying, he volunteered with a community legal aid center, helping families navigate the system to get their loved ones' cases reviewed. I watched him transform his trauma into purpose, his fear into resolve. And quietly, without telling him, I wrote a recommendation letter to my alma mater's law school, detailing not just Marcus's academic qualifications but the strength of character he'd demonstrated through unimaginable adversity. 3 months after Grissom's sentencing, Marcus stood at our mailbox holding an envelope from the law school. His hands trembled slightly as he carried it inside. "I can't open it," he said, setting it on the kitchen table. I smiled. "Yes, you can." He took a deep breath and tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the letter, then filled with tears. "Full scholarship," he whispered, looking up at me. "Dad, I got a full scholarship." I moved around the table and pulled him into my arms, my own eyes burning with unshed tears. The letter fluttered to the table, revealing my name among the signatories of the scholarship committee. "You did this?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. "No," I said firmly, holding him at arm's length so he could see the truth in my eyes. "You did this. Every step of the way, son. You earned this." He hugged me again, and I felt his tears soaking through my shirt. But these weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of triumph, of possibility, of a future reclaimed from the jaws of injustice. As we stood there in our kitchen, the acceptance letter between us, I knew that while Grissom's sentence had closed one chapter, Marcus's scholarship was opening another, one filled with purpose and promise. I walked alone along the beach, my bare feet sinking into the cool morning sand. The sun had just cleared the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and gold. I'd been coming here every Sunday for the past few months, my own private ritual of reflection. The weight around my neck was light but constant, a reminder of everything we'd survived. I reached up and ran my fingers over Marcus's high school ring, now hanging from a simple silver chain. The metal was warm from resting against my skin. 3 months had passed since Marcus started law school. 3 months of late-night calls filled with excited chatter about constitutional law and judicial precedent. 3 months of watching my son rebuild himself into something stronger than before. A wave crashed against the shore, sending foamy water rushing toward my feet. I stood my ground, letting the tide swirl around my ankles before retreating back to the vast ocean. That's how justice works, I thought. It might recede for a time, might seem distant and unreachable, but if you stand firm long enough, it always returns. I continued walking, the wet sand firm beneath my feet. The beach was mostly empty this early, save for a young family setting up near the water's edge. A father and mother knelt beside their small daughter, helping her pack wet sand into a plastic bucket. When they upturned it, the little girl squealed with delight at the perfect tower they'd created. "Higher, Daddy," she demanded, already scooping more sand. The man laughed and reached for another bucket. "Okay, Princess, let's build it as high as the sky." I slowed my pace, watching them work together. The father caught my eye and nodded a greeting. I returned the gesture, something warm unfurling in my chest. This was what we'd fought for, not just Marcus's freedom, but the simple right of families to exist without fear, to build sandcastles on Sunday mornings, to plan futures that weren't derailed by corruption and hate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a message from Marcus with a photo attached. He stood in his dormitory room, proudly pointing to a framed document on his wall, his first perfect score on a civil procedure exam. "Like father, like son," the message read. I smiled and typed back, "Better than your old man already." Slipping the phone back into my pocket, I continued along the shoreline. The ring bounced gently against my chest with each step. Marcus had given it to me the day he left for school. "I want you to have this," he'd said, pressing the ring into my palm. "To remember what we went through, what you did for me." I'd protested at first. It was his ring, his achievement, but he'd been insistent. "Every time I look at it, I see that jail cell," he'd admitted quietly. "But when you wear it, maybe I can start seeing something different, something better." So I'd threaded it onto a chain and worn it every day since, not as a reminder of the darkness we'd faced, but as a testament to the light we'd found on the other side. I stopped walking and turned to face the ocean fully. The vastness of it always humbled me, how something so powerful could also be so constant, so dependable. The waves would continue their rhythm long after I was gone, just as the law, at its best, continued its work regardless of who wielded its power. Grissom's case had triggered a cascade of reforms throughout the county. The prison kickback scheme had been dismantled, dozens of wrongful convictions had been overturned, and Marcus, my brilliant, resilient son, was now dedicating his life to ensuring such abuses never happened again. The young family's sandcastle had grown impressively tall. The little girl now stood back, hands on her hips, surveying their creation with serious eyes. "It needs a flag," she declared. Her mother produced a small paper triangle attached to a twig, which the child planted ceremoniously at the castle's peak. They all clapped, celebrating this small triumph against gravity and tide. I smiled, understanding their joy. Sometimes the most meaningful victories were the ones that seemed smallest to others. A sandcastle standing tall, a son safe in his dorm room, a corrupt judge serving his sentence far from the power he'd abused. A particularly large wave rushed up the beach, threatening the family's creation. The father quickly built a protective wall around it, diverting the water. The castle stood firm as the wave retreated. I wrapped my hand around Marcus's ring, feeling its familiar contours. The sunlight caught the metal, sending a flash of brightness across the sand. Like a signal, like a promise. In that moment, standing between earth and ocean, I felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't known was possible after everything we'd endured. Not the fragile peace of a temporary reprieve, but something deeper and more enduring. The peace of a life rebuilt from ashes, stronger than before. I smiled quietly, my hand still wrapped around the ring, and continued my walk along the shore. If you enjoyed this story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss. If you enjoyed this story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.